The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Okay, hi, good afternoon. This is Alan Blumkin. I'm here with my good friend David Nemec, and we're going to have another discussion on David Nemec's baseball history and trivia. Today we're going to discuss the National League from the post-war to the early 50s. Welcome, David.
Pleasure to be with you once again, Al.
It always is.
Yeah, it
is. A pleasure for me, too, yeah.
We discussed the National League, or the American League principally, and especially the Red Sox, and we had some things to say about Joe McCarthy as a manager. I think we're both in agreement that McCarthy was probably vastly overrated for his managerial skills, and that had he been with a different team during that time, he might be a little remembered today, if at all. But he happened to be with a good Cubs team for a time, and then he was with the Yankees when he won a lot of easy pennants. But the National League, during that time, we didn't spend a lot, and we didn't really discuss that much about. And I think the National League, in some ways, equally as interesting, and not more so, than the American League in the late 40s, going into the early 50s. Beginning with the 46th season, when guys are returning from the war. During the war, the Cardinals had been the class of the National League. They'd won the pennant in 42, 43, and 44. And 45, they lost Musial and a couple of their other key players to the military. And as a result, slipped to second place. The Cubs beat them out, interrupting what could have become a 42 to 46 5-year run of consecutive pennants, because the Cardinals were primed when the veterans returned. They were primed to go back to their pre 45 team, featuring a lot of good pitchers and some very, very good players led by Musial. But in the 46th season, it began in a very peculiar way. During spring training, even before, the Mexican League decided to make a full push to try and sign as many major league players as possible, bring them down to the Mexican League, guarantee them a lot more money, good playing conditions, and so forth and so on. And one of the teams they hit really hard were the Cardinals. During spring training, they were after Musial. They were after third baseman Whitey Kurowski. They went after some of the Cardinals' key pitchers, most especially Max Lanier. And Lanier fended them off for a time, but after he began the season 6-0, winning all 6 of his first 4 starts, going into the middle of May, he succumbed to Mexican League and Mexican League scouts, and the lure of money and so forth, and took with him Fred Martin and second baseman Lou Klein, who had been a really key member of the 45 team, taking over at second base, and looked good to be the regular second baseman in 46. When Klein went, the Cardinals had to scramble around to get another second baseman. Unfortunately, found they had one on their roster, a guy who'd been their center fielder as a rookie, Red Schoendienst. And Schoendienst moved in to play second base. Lanier was not so easy to replace, even though their pitching staff was deep, especially with people like, Johnny Beasley, a 20-game winner,
Beasley never did anything after that rookie season. Yeah, they had. I think the big ones were Paulette. I think won the ERA, and I think he won 20 games that year. Paulette.
He did.
And
that was
Harry Blumkin, who would go on, to win 3 games in the World Series.
Yeah.
Ted Wilkes.
Ted Wilkes, Al Brazel.
Yeah, Red Munger.
A lot of guys who are little remembered today stepped up, and in particular, Blumkin, who was really during the season, his record was only so. I think he was like 15-15, but it was largely because he got very little run support whenever he pitched, and as Al was mentioning, Blumkin became a key factor in the World Series. But getting back to that team, which had a second baseman too, who prior to World War II, his induction into the military, had looked really good. A guy named Frank Creepy Crespi.
Yeah, he got his leg shot off in the war. Yeah.
No, actually, what happened is that Crespi, broke his leg during the war, and then re-injured it in a wheelchair race, and re-injured it so severely that he really was never able to come back and even think about playing at the major league level. And Johnny Beasley wrecked his arm when he wasn't in condition, really. He'd been soldiering more than playing baseball, unlike many other major leaguers during the war who did get to play a lot of ball. He didn't. But he was forced by his commanding officer to pitch in an exhibition game against the Cardinals for I can't remember whether his unit or his regiment or whatever it was. But Beasley wrecked his arm pitching against his team.
No, I didn't know that. I knew it. He was a 20-game winner in 1942, and then he just... That was it.
That was it. Never won another game.
No, he won a couple of games. He pitched a couple of years, but not very effective. I think he wound up on the Boston Braves, where after Billy Southworth went over there, after 45, I think that the Cardinals did a lot of trades quite a number of trades with the Braves.
They did, and there were a couple other Cardinal pre-war pitchers too who had been very good. Ernie White was another one, left-hander.
Yeah.
He too, after the war, he was in the Battle of the Bulge and a lot of other combat, and he came back. He just didn't have it anymore. So the Cardinals looked like a tremendously deep pitching staff in spring training, going into spring training, and of course starting the season with Lanier going 6-0, suddenly found themselves short of pitching, and found themselves in a really a struggle with the Brooklyn Dodgers, who hadn't done much during the war at all. But the Dodgers came back strong in '46 under Leo DeRocher, and their pennant race went right down to the final day. Right down to the final day of the season. They ended up tied for first place, and they had to go to the first pennant playoff in Major League history. In the National League then, it was a 2-out-of-3 game series, and the Dodgers won the coin toss, and they were given a choice. You can either hope it at home in Ebbets Field and play the next 2 games in St. Louis, getting a day off for travel in between, or you can open the game in St. Louis and play the next 2 games in Ebbets Field at home, getting that same day off in between.
There was a
story the Dodgers chose to go. Yeah. They chose to go to St. Louis, and it really was a mistake. They were punchless during the game in St. Louis. They came back to Brooklyn having to win both games, and St. Louis put them away. They won the series 2-0.
Ironically, when they won the toss for 1951, and because they remembered the Dodger staff remembered what happened in 1946, they decided to play the opening game in Brooklyn and the last 2 in the Polo Grounds. And we all know what happened there.
Well, I did not think of that, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. So the Cardinals were a pretty spent team going into the World Series. they had to replace their pre-war second baseman Crespi. Whitey Kurowski was a solid player, but Kurowski was an interesting player. Kurowski was right-handed. He was playing third base, and Kurowski's right arm was about 4 inches shorter than his left arm due to a childhood injury. He'd fallen off a fence into some broken glass when he was a little kid. His arm had become infected. They had to save his arm at all. They had to cut away 4 inches of bone in his right arm, in the forearm, and that reduced him. He was a right-handed hitter and a right-handed thrower. Here's a guy with a right arm 4 inches shorter than the left arm playing third base, a very tough position which requires a great arm, and a right-handed batter, and having to, his top arm was 4 inches shorter than his left arm, which was gripping the bat at the bottom, and he had to find ways to hit that other players would never have attempted. He had to dig in with almost right on top of the plate. And as a result, he was constantly dodging pitches, but he nevertheless was a really strong hitter, and really contributed heavily to their winning the pennant.
Yeah, the shortstop was Marty Marion, who had won the MVP in 1944.
Right.
Who was a 260 hitter, but he was the glue to the infield, and I think his nickname was the Octopus.
Yeah. Yeah. He was. I think he was he the MVP in 44?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, he was the MVP at 260 hitting shortstop. That's rare. I mean, you really don't see that. You saw something similar with Ozzie Smith, but and even to a degree with Louis Aparicio. But
they gave the MVP award to Musial for 43. Yeah. So I think they possibly didn't want to give it to them 2 years in a row.
That could be. Yeah. That could be. Yeah. But but meanwhile, the Red Sox were managed by Joe Cronin, who'd been a player manager prior to that. Then played some during the war, and had been a long-term shortstop with the Red Sox, previously with the Senators, and he took them to a fairly easy pennant. It wasn't really they won by a substantial margin. They had a good team, solid everywhere, but a little bit short in the outfield, and that cost them, as it turned out in the series. But the Cardinals were managed by a guy who is little remembered today, but was deeply respected during the 1940s, and that was Eddie Dyer. Dyer was a former pitcher for the Cardinals who'd been on the pennant-winning 26 team that won the series against the Yankees, but hurt himself and couldn't pitch in the series. He was a relief pitcher primarily, a southpaw, and then came back to manage the team in 46 because Billy Southworth, who led the team to 3 straight pennants in 42, 43, and 44, quit after the 45 season.
Yeah, what happened was his son, I read a biography on Southworth that came out a number of years ago. His son, who was a fighter pilot, flew a number of missions in Europe, and then he came back here and was killed in a training accident at LaGuardia.
Yeah.
And Southworth, who had been on the wagon, went back to drinking.
Yeah.
And he'd have bouts of depressions. He would go on to manage the Braves in 48 and won with them, but in 49 he started hitting the source again, and he alienated Alvin Dark and Eddie Stanky, who were the shortstop and second baseman for the Braves, because they were teetotalers.
Yeah. Yeah.
He left because his whole personality changed after the Suns crash.
Yeah. No, that's true. It did. He really, yeah. He still, was a good manager.
Yeah.
And but he was a kind of fiery guy when he first started to manage. He managed the Cardinals as early as 1928.
Yeah.
For the first time, he began as the or 1929. I'm sorry, 28. The manager was Bill McKechnie, another guy who really was instrumental in what happened to baseball in the 40s. And McKechnie, when the 29 season opened, hadn't won the series, and a lot of players respected him very much. Others did not. They didn't think he was fiery enough to really serve as a manager in that era, and he ended up being sent to manage Rochester, and the Rochester manager, who had been Billy Southworth, was moved up to manage the Cardinals, and he turned out to be too fiery and alienated most of his roster. So what the Cardinals then did is swap managers again. They sent Southworth back to Rochester to finish the season, and brought. They sent Southworth back to manage the Rochester, and brought McKechnie in again to finish the season. It was crazy, and the Cardinals did not win again in '29. But then they got rid of McKechnie after the season. Actually, he signed a 4-year contract to manage the Braves, and when the Cardinals didn't offer him enough money, and the Cardinals then brought in Gabby Street out of nowhere, and Gabby Street took him to 2 straight pennants, and the Cardinals were really a strong team, as we're pointing out.
That's because of Branch Rickey with the farm system.
Exactly, and Rickey was very instrumental, of course, by 1946, in forming what the Brooklyn team looked like, because he'd gone over to Brooklyn as general manager. And
the Dodgers and the Yankees signed prospects during the war, which most of the other teams did not.
Yeah.
So they were stacked by the time it ended. There's a book that came out several years ago called The Victory Season by an author named Robert Weintraub, which is the whole story of 1946. It's very, very good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, it came out a few years ago. I have it, and I read it way back when.
Okay, it was good.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 46th season was much more interesting than people realized. That first war. Another thing.
It was also basically a National League of Pitchers season, because Ralph Kiner led the league in home runs with 23.
Exactly, but
this is before they bought the fences. They put in the fences in Forbes Field 30 feet.
Yeah, and some think they were still using some of the baseballs that were used during the war that were really almost a dead ball, and because the home run total with guys that were coming back like Musial and Johnny Mize in particular, you couldn't see them not hitting 25 or 30 home runs. It just didn't make
Mize
sense.
at 22, I think. That was before that. Kiner and Mize tied.
Yeah,
for the home run championships in 47 and 48.
And 47 and 48 were much more, inflated total. But in 46, Dyer was hired. And finally, after a long term in the minors, when he'd been a manager and with great success, Dyer was a really key figure in the Cardinals organization, and is little remembered today for helped put together that team with Rickey that had come out of the 30s, the Gas House Gang, all those guys from that team into the 40s with a new crew. And after the war, Dyer was rewarded by being promoted from his positions in minor leagues. He was made manager of the Cardinals. and took them to the World Series, and it pitted Ted Williams against Stan Musial for the one and only time. Probably the two finest ball players, one in each league pre-World War II, prior to expansion. I would say I would say Musial and Williams were the two, but of course Mickey Mantle came along, and certainly others came along in the National League, gave them competition. But so going into the World Series, the Red Sox were favored, and with Williams really having a fine year, Hall of Fame year, showing a lot of power. It was going to be his first shot against National League pitching, which he handled very well in All-Star games, and he came up a bust. But the Red Sox nevertheless won 3 of the first 5 games. They went into the final 2 games with a 3-2 lead.
There's a story that the Red Sox were playing some exhibitions to keep in shape because they had clinched early and were waiting for the Cardinals and Dodgers with the playoff. And supposedly Williams got hit on the wrist during one of those exhibition games. That's why he couldn't hit very well in that World Series.
Yes, I've read that too. I don't remember what Williams had to say about it, if anything, because it does make sense, because the Cardinals didn't seem to have a whole lot of trouble with. They used the shift that Lou Boudreau was credited with inventing in 1946, although he wasn't the first to use the pronounced shift that you see in today's game that will be illegal next year against pull hitters. And the shift was also used by the Red Sox, and is little remembered today. They used it against, not Stan Musial, they used it against Whitey Kurowski, who, because of his shortened right arm, became almost strictly a pull hitter. So they had their infield stacked toward left field, and their outfield arrayed stacked toward left field. And it wasn't much of a factor in the series. At least I don't recall ever having read or heard from anyone who thought it was. But it was a shift that was applied against him. I never read about it being applied by any of the National League teams against him, even though he was pretty much strictly a pull hitter. But in the last two games of the series, I think Paulette won Game 6, if I'm not mistaken. And then they came into Game 7, and the Red Sox jumped out to a lead. The Red Sox, I might be getting this. I'm not sure about what the score was when, but in the 8th inning, the Red Sox, I think the game was tied, and the Cardinals had a 2-run lead. And I think Paulette went out to start the 8th and put the tying runs on base. And then they brought in Harry Burkeen, who had won Game 4 on only 1 day's rest. And Burkeen came in the 8th and gave up two runs. He gave it the 2 guys who were on base, both scored and were counted against Paulette because he put them in base. But then he got through the 8th, and in the bottom of the 8th.
Yeah, well, Don DiMaggio got in hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. The bottom.
And put in was it
Leon Culberson?
Well, Culberson, yeah.
Yeah, Culberson came into the game, and Harry Walker was up with Slaughter on first base, and Slaughter contended that no, he didn't really score from first on a single. Wasn't quite that dramatic because he had been given the sign to steal by Dyer, and so he was off on the pitch, and he was already rounding second base. He said before when he saw the ball that the hit was going into right field, and already made up his mind as soon as he rounded second base, regardless of what he saw the third base coach doing, he was going for the plate, and he went into the plate and scored, and it's debated to this day whether the run he was largely responsible for that run, or Johnny the shortstop. hesitated on the throw home, and it may have even been the relay throw to Cope from Cope. I'll take over. I got to get some water.
All right.
Now go ahead because I can't.
All right. Yeah, because Slaughter came home and scored the they called the mad dash. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
they won. As also turned out to be the last World Series for both Williams and Musial.
It was, yeah. It was. Nobody would have dreamed that at the time because both the Red Sox and the Cardinals looked strong for years to come, and they were strong for the next few years. The Cardinals started 47, Dyer at the helm. Kurowski started having more trouble with his right arm, and still had a very good season, really good season.
Well,
but Musial
played most of the year with a frozen appendix.
Yeah,
in 1947, which he had a year which 95% of the players would give their arms for. But by his standards, especially between 1946 and 48, which was his two most productive, really productive seasons, that slowed him down. Of course, now to get a player to do that, forget it. Yeah.
And the Cardinals began to Musial was having to play first base too, and he was really a good outfielder. They would like to have used him in the outfielder, but the Cardinals, Branch Rickey had traded Johnny Mize when he thought Mize, when he can still get a good price for Mize. And after trading Mize, the Cardinals seemed to have guys in their farm system who were going to be able to do the job, like Johnny Hopp and Ray Sanders, and then Dick Sisler, George Sisler's oldest son. Although I don't know why the Cardinals really thought they had a player in Sisler because his minor league record wasn't that great. But he was penciled in as being the first baseman in 46.
Yeah, then later on they used Nippy Jones for a year or two as a regular first baseman.
Yeah, they used Nippy Jones, and Nippy Jones didn't have a whole lot of power either.
No.
And Sisler, even though he had a dramatic homer to win the pennant in 1950 for the Phillies, it was not really a long ball hitter. It was, a contact hitter, and not that good a one. And really, for a first baseman, his averages were probably below standard for a first baseman at that time. But the Cardinals had trouble. Terry Moore, their center fielder, was aging, really wasn't able to play a full season. Joe Medwick was on his last legs. He had joined the Cardinals after the war, and
Harry Walker they traded to the Phillies right at the start of 47.
Yeah, and they had trouble in 47, but nevertheless put up a reasonably good fight. But the Dodgers ended up winning, and then as we've discussed, in 1948 the Braves came. One more thing about the 47 season. Kurowski had really a fine year, and looking back, comparing stats that season, I'm still wondering why Bob Elliott and not Kurowski was the MVP. Elliott played for the Braves, which were a surprise team in 47.
Yeah, well, Pirates gave him away. Yeah.
But his stats weren't any better than Kurowski's. Kurowski's were just as strong, and yet he finished well down in the balloting, probably as low as 9th or 10th at least, if not lower, in the MVP. And he was a very underrated player, I think. And that was his big season. And in 1948, Kurowski had really started to have serious arm trouble. Wasn't able to play every day. Was replaced by a career minor leaguer named Don Lang for most of the season. And the Cardinals, as a result, suffered at third base. The Dodgers had problems with their pitching. and the Braves came along and took it all with Spot and Sain and 2 days of rain, which wasn't quite accurate, but that was a good line anyway.
Yeah, because DeRocher had been suspended for the 1947 season, and they brought him back, the Dodgers, for 48. And he got into a big dispute with Branch Rickey, because the Dodgers had no catching when the 48 season started, because the one who played the most in 47, a catcher by the name of Bruce Edwards, had a bad arm. And they had signed Roy Campanella, and DeRocher was screaming. He saw Campanella in spring training. He was screaming, "Give me Campanella, give me Campanella, give me." And Rickey used Campanella to break the call line in the American Association, AAA League. And they started having not to get along, even though they did bring up Campanella, I think, in June. And it led to the estrangement. So when the Giants fired Malat, Stone called Rickey up and said, "Could we have Bert Shotton?" And Rickey said to him, "If you want, you can have DeRocher."
Yeah.
And I was only 5 years old at the time, but it went crazy because DeRocher, who the Giant fans had hated for years because he managed the Dodgers, all of a sudden is managing the Giants.
Yeah.
And the Dodger fans who idolized DeRocher, he comes in wearing a Giant uniform. That must have been some spectacle.
Yeah, it's
but
DeRocher, got on the bad side of almost everybody eventually. I mean, his suspension was for hanging out with shady characters, gamblers, and Happy Chandler fearing that this guy could be involved somehow with and suspending him. And it was a bold move. It was certainly a bold move to suspend a manager of a contender for the entire season, especially a guy who had tied for the pennant the year before and only lost it in the playoffs. But
it would have made Jackie Robinson's adjustment easier.
It would have. Yeah, it would have. And Campanella was not, when he did come up for a partial half season, had a solid but not great rookie season. And in 49, though, he really began to blossom and show that he not only was a good catcher, but he was a good hitter, and he had power. He had real power, which was very uncommon then for catchers. We saw another one develop in the American League, of course, at the same time in Yogi Berra.
Yeah, the thing is the opposing, when the Dodgers brought Don Newcomb up in 1949, the opposing pitchers stopped throwing at Robinson and Campanella.
Yeah.
Because they would knock the two of them down with impunity, and then Newcomb came up, and I think the theory was for every one of ours you knocked down, we're going to knock down two of yours.
Yeah,
and it stopped.
It did. Yeah, Newcomb was a key. Yeah.
Yeah, Spot had a mediocre year in 48. He was only 15-12.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But actually, the Braves had a deeper staff than the Spot saying. They had Vern Bickford and Bill Boiselle. Both of them started quite a number of games. They really had a four-man staff. I saw Bickford actually pitch a series game against Gene Bearden. Cleveland shut out the Braves 2-0 in 48, and I didn't know who Bickford was then. I didn't really follow the National League, but and I could say, wow, this guy looks like a pretty good pitcher too. And the Braves team as a whole was pretty solid, but they faltered in the series largely because in the toward the end of the season. Well, Stanky was hurt, knocked out for half the season, couldn't play in the series, and also injured in a slide into home plate near the end of the season was Jeff Heath, who was their Braves' finest power hitter. He was coming back from a long period in the doldrums in the American League, playing for the Senators and the Browns, and kind of losing interest in the game, and put together a fine 48 season, and probably might have changed the series results around if he'd been able to play in the series. We'll never know. But the Braves did field a pretty fine team going into the series, and it was anybody's guess who would win but the Indians prevailed. And then, going into 49, here we have, this is now the fourth season in a row where the two strongest teams, with the Braves falling back, are once again the Cardinals and the Dodgers. And once again, they go down to the last day of the season. The Cardinals lose a game, and they lose. They finish the season in Chicago with a 3-game series, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they start Max Lanier, who's come back after being suspended from organized baseball by Happy Chandler for having pitched in the Mexican League. But the suspension is lifted by mid-season in 49.
Because there was a lawsuit that they didn't want to go
exactly,
through.
Brought by Danny Gardella et al. And it was a successful lawsuit in that Major League Baseball backed down and brought them right back. Everybody who wanted to play back in the major leagues, they were back in uniform. If they wanted to be, and most of them did. And so Lanier came back to the Cardinals, pitched on Friday, and was shelled. When he came back and joined us. He made the staff and molded himself right in among the starters, and was getting a regular pitching assignment right away. And I think he ended up something like 9-5 for half a season. But he started on Friday and he got shellacked. He got shelled, and the Cubs beat the Cardinals on Friday, and I think the Cubs won again on Saturday, and the Cardinals won on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. And but when the Dodgers won on Saturday, they clinched a tie for the pennant. All they had to do was win Sunday, and the pennant would be theirs. And what happened was the Dodgers went into extra innings, if I'm not mistaken, and they prevailed over the Phillies on the last day of the season and avoided what could have been the third pennant playoff in 4 seasons. Because there'd been a pennant playoff in the American League in 48. The National League would have had to play a 2 out of 3 playoff in 49. And they would have had, and again in 51, they would have had 3 pennant playoffs in a 6-year period, if not for the 49 ending. Because if Brooklyn hadn't won that game, they would have finished tied.
When David Halberstam did his book Summer of 49, it was totally on the Yankees and Red Sox.
Yeah,
I don't think the National League was even mentioned.
You're right.
I was thinking years ago I had energy doing a book called The Other Summer of 49 about the Dodgers and the Cardinals.
That would have been a good one. That really would have, because it was an interesting year with the Mexican leaguers coming back, influx, Don Newcomb, here's Don Newcomb now.
Robinson won the MVP that year.
Yeah, and Newcomb actually started. He started the game that he lost. He lost his last start of the season, and nevertheless was selected by Bert Schotten to open the World Series, a rookie, and lost the 49 opener to the Yankees 1-0 on a Tommy Henrich home run was it the bottom of the ninth or the top of the ninth?
Bottom of the ninth.
Bottom of the ninth was a walk-off.
Yeah, it was a
home
walk-off,
run.
what they call a walk-off these days. And Newcomb wound up his career in the World Series. He was 0-4 with an 8.59 ERA.
Yeah, but he pitched a fine game in that first game.
Allie Reynolds beat him.
Yeah, I remember listening to that game on the radio. We were in school, and they did have it on, and I was rooting for Brooklyn. I have to admit, I knew who the Dodgers had, and I liked that team a lot.
Yeah, and one thing that was always a mystery to me was the Cardinals collapsing in 1950, and it really took them until 1957 before they even contended for anything after that.
Yeah.
They fell to fifth place. Marty Marion got old.
Dyer got fired.
Yeah, they had a rookie in 1949 named Eddie Kazak, who played half the season at third base, was doing very well, broke his leg, and that was basically the end of him.
And that's Kazak is an interesting story because, he came up when he came up as a third baseman, he'd played second mostly in the minors, but he came up and they wanted to convert him to third because they had Shane Deeds at second and knew that Kurowski wasn't going to be able to do the job anymore. So when Kazak came to camp, I believe in 48, he didn't make the team, but Kurowski really took him aside and showed him the ropes. Kurowski was a really good guy to have on a team, really strong teammate, and was very instrumental in helping the Cardinals team from averting a player strike the first time they played the Dodgers because they weren't in agreement about facing Jackie Robinson. And Kurowski supposedly gave a clubhouse speech, and he also gave a clubhouse speech about, we're playing for the team here, and we're not, we're not doing the service to the team or to baseball. But by 49, he was really finished. He only played a handful of games. And as Al said, Kazak operated at third base he was hurt toward the end of the season.
Half the season. He was selected to the All-Star team.
Yeah, he was.
And they broke his leg, and that was basically, he hung around for a couple of years after that, but
he did.
It was never the same. I mean, the reason I know as much as I do, not nearly what you know, was from the 51 and 52 baseball cards.
Yeah.
That's how I learned about all these guys. I know more about them than I do about 90% of the players that are playing today.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Cardinals had a different third baseman every year. They had Don Lang in 48, primarily a minor. He's back in the minors by 49. They had Kazak in 49. Then they had Tommy Graziano in 1950, I believe. Yeah,
and they bought Billy Johnson from the Yankees, and he was there until Jablonski came up in 53. And then Jablonski was there for 2 years, and they traded him to the Reds and to make room for Ken Boyer.
Well, Ken Boyer was actually in center field at the time.
If he played center field in 1957, he played the full year in center field.
But didn't he play a little bit before there? That too.
I have to look that up, because I think they brought up Eddie Casco that year, and they put him at third base and put Boyer out in center field. Yeah.
I think you're right. You're right.
They had traded for Alvin Dark, and Alvin Dark played shortstop, and then when for 1957, and they shipped Alvin Dark to the Cubs right at the beginning of '58 for Jim Brosnan. But you're right. At first base, they had a problem with. They had Steve Bilko as a regular 1 year.
They had Rocky Nelson.
Steve Bilko, was a regular in '53, and then, went back to the Pacific Coast League where he was a superstar.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think Joe Cunningham. They had a number of these guys. Yeah.
Well, Cunningham was a good ball player. I mean, he was solid. He played the outfield because he was a good outfielder too. And I think didn't they have George Crow briefly? And they had an influx of Tom Olson. Yeah. They had a bunch of guys who played just a season or two. Yeah, and including Bill Coe, and they really didn't have a first baseman until, I mean, when did they come up with somebody who really lasted there? Bill White. Bill White, you're right. I think it was Bill White, and that would have been what 59. They traded him for Sam Jones after 58. They traded him. Okay. The Giants traded White to the Cardinals for Sam Jones after 58. Okay, so White came from the Giants. Yeah. And then White, and then he was there to 65 because after 65 they traded him to the Phillies. You know. So White really was the first guy. Yeah. Since Johnny Mize. Yeah. Back in the early 40s. Yeah. To hold down the job for more than one full season, the pitchers in 1950, most of them went to pot. Ted Wilson, Howie Paulette were dealt to the Pirates in June 51 when the Cardinals got Wally Westlake and Cliff Chambers. Yeah. All of them, Munger, McCain. Yeah. Brazel was still effective as a relief pitcher for a couple of years. Brazel was he was a career-long Cardinal. Yeah. And, he and Brickane were born in Oklahoma 5 days apart. Yeah. Brazel, I think he was past 30 by the time he came up. Yeah. And, Brazel and Wilkes were very good guys to have. And Murray Dixon, they sold Murray Dixon to the Pirates. Yeah, that was a mistake. Yeah. And they also had trouble replacing Terry Moore. And they used a guy, Forsack Dusack. I don't know if you remember Irv Dusack. Oh, yeah. He was in the 52 top set as a Pirate. He was a pitcher and a hitter, a position player. Couldn't do either of them very well. They had Chuck Deering. Chuck Deering? Who was 1 year played in 105 games and had 74 play appearances. Yeah. He was I think he was the first guy to do that. I don't think Sammy Bird ever did that. With the Yankees. No, because I did a project on what I call caddies. I did that a whole bunch of years ago. I presented it at a Saban meeting. Saban National. How about Jack Reed? Did he do it? Oh, no. He didn't do it either. Okay, no. So probably... They had a guy named Rush Machio who was a defensive replacement for Mantle one of those late years, and he played 96 games, was up 27 times. Yeah. And they had Gene Stevens did that, for 7 years with Ed Williams. Exactly. Wow. Yeah. Chuck Deering, that's a name I forgot. Yeah, in fact, when the Cardinals traded for Stanky after 51 to become their manager, the Giants got Deering and Lanier. Yeah. We've touched them all. I think all the seasons going into the 1950s, and Cardinals in Brooklyn were at the end of the 49 season. They were definitely the class of the National League. 49 was the real beginning of the Boys of Summer. Yeah. And 50 and 51 they would lose pennants in the most bizarre fashion, and but they could have had a dynasty the way the Yankees did during that decade, but they could have won. They could have won 46, 47.
Yeah.
48 would have been a stretch. It would have had a lot of help to get
58
there.
lose the last
40,
night.
49, 50, 51, 52, 53.
53, yeah.
Yeah, from 46 through 53, they were right there, except for 48. Almost right there to the last day of the season, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because they won. They were in a tie in 46. They won in 47. They won in 49. 48 is the only season where, going into the last day of the season, they were out of contention.
Well,
every other year they were there.
I can go into a scree on Charlie Dressen, but there's no time for that.
Yeah. Yeah, poor Charlie has gotten his share over the years, and I can't find. I really never found anyone who could support it. Him. But nevertheless, he did put together pennant winners, and
he put two pennant winners together. And I put down every time because he was great at ruining pitchers, and I put down that they won in 52 and 53 despite him, not because of him.
Yeah, I think that's true. That's true.
But that's for another time and another time.
Well, this
anyway,
fun.
This is
as
usual.
I really
this was great.
This. Yeah,
and hopefully we can do another one soon.
We will. We will definitely. Yeah.
I'm glad you're feeling better, and give my best to Marilyn.
I will. Thanks, Al.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Take care.
And great to be with you once again.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices, and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.